Can I just start? Is that okay? Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here for this evening's lecture by Tim Benton entitled Two Ideas, One Outcome, the Villa by Zoo. Part of the Berlage Keynotes, our ongoing lecture series featuring internationally prominent thinkers along with designers. Tonight's lecture is organized on the occasion of the masterclass Why Le Corbusier, which Tim is teaching at the Berlage this and next week. It's a pleasure to have Tim back at the Berlage, where he has given several lectures over the years. He's Professor Emeritus of Art History at the Open University. Well, I've had to nuance this bio in function of his work on Le Corbusier, so it does not include everything, but his research interests include Le Corbusier's work of the late 1920s and 30s, and the history of modern architecture and design. His classic study, The Villas of Le Corbusier and Pierre Jeanneret, 1920 to 30, was republished in 2007. He has published a major study on the rhetorical methods by Le Corbusier and the lectures with which, used by Le Corbusier in the lectures with which he spread his ideas across the world using previously unpublished manuscripts, sketches, and photographs. He is currently working on a life of Le Corbusier and a book on Le Corbusier's domestic architecture from 1910 to 1935. This, I actually do not know if it's true, but it's on the Open University website. I have that verified. So, you know, if this is not true, we just say that it is, you know. And he's also directing a series of 3 volumes of text, drafts, drawings, and critiques of Le Corbusier's lectures for the Fondation Le Corbusier. In recent years, Tim's been best known perhaps for his Open University distance learning course, A305, History of Architecture and Design 1990 to 1939. But actually, most of his teaching career has either focused on the Renaissance or the architecture of John Soane. So this is how I'm quoting you in that one. So but I guess part of my reason for including the teaching of the Renaissance in there is kind of bringing in, kind of thinking about ideas in a broader kind of context and set of relationships than just modernism, but perhaps how modernism emerged at another kind of moment or retroactively going back. So thank you for giving this lecture. I'm very excited for this. The moment that you gave it, I got all sorts of the first time a version of this you gave a few months ago in Tunis. I got a bunch of text messages about what a lovely lecture this was. So hence, actually, I commissioned this one in a way. Can you talk on this? So I'm very curious. Thank you.
Tropical climates or hot climates in ventilation and protection against the sun. So there are 2 sets of completely different ideas in this project, which are incorporated in 2 projects, as we'll see. Is this working? Is this working? Come closer this one. Closer? Yeah. Ah, okay. Okay. I have a feeble voice. Is that better? Is that better? Okay. Fine. Well, I'm not going to repeat what I've just said. So I'm interested in it from these 2 points of view, and I'm going to try to interest you in it as well. So this is Sidi Bou Said in a suburb of Tunis, in Carthage, which is a kind of promontory that sticks out beyond the city of Tunis into the sea. It's a beautiful residential area which was developed in the late 19th century. Has wealthy villas in it, very beautiful. It's now a kind of tourist center. And from there, you can look back to the area of Sainte-Monique, which is a suburb, and there is the Villa Bezo. Okay. And on the left of it is something that didn't exist when the building was designed, which is the presidential palace, which was built on land recovered from the sea, which didn't exist at the time. So at the time, the house was on a little cliff that went down to the sea with a beautiful view from the sea. Okay. So if you look at it a little bit more closely, this is almost as close as you can get. We got as far as the road there leading up, where we were confronted by armed police who were sort of saying like, no, like that. So I didn't manage to get a photograph from up there. But you can see where the road turns there. That's a metal gate, and everything beyond that is the presidential palace. And the Villa Bezo now contains the archive of the Secret Service, the Tunisian Secret Service. So you can't get inside it. But as we'll see, a photographer did get onto it, to the outside, and took nice photographs of it. So that's it there. So that's the presidential palace. It's not a great work of architecture. And there is the Villa Bezo. No, that's the context. And these are photographs taken in the 1940s, 1947. Now, what am I talking about? In 2015, by a photographer called Thomas Billange, who did a picture book with the support, I think probably paid for by the town, the municipality of Tunis, of beautiful buildings in Tunis, part of a tourist thing probably. And through that connection, he was able to film this. You cannot possibly film this now because these police would stop you, these armed guards would stop you. This is a photograph in the 1940s. Between 1947 and 1961, the house was lived in by the great niece of the original client, Lucien Bezo. Lucien Bezo died, I think, in 1945 or something like that. He fought with the Free French in North Africa. And the family moved, sorry, I'm making a confusion. The family of the great niece of Lucien Bezo, they moved from Algiers to Tunis in 1947. And Lucien Bezo passed the house to them. And we have the record of this family. Sabine Massenet has written about it and taken photographs. And this is from her scrapbook of photographs from this period between 1947 and 61. And it's interesting because the catalogue, this catalogue, do you see this if I point it up? Very beautiful catalogue of the exhibition that's just been held in Tunis. There's her recollections, and those of her brothers and sisters. She had 8 brothers and sisters of living in this house. And it was, they liked it very much. They thought it was a beautiful house, but they had various comments to make. It was very cold in winter. There were things they didn't like, but mostly it was a beautiful house. It was a lovely period of their life. They liked the colors in the house. They liked the rooms. And they loved these big terraces, these big balconies where they could play. There's the dining room, and that's a view of the house in this period after the war. This is the back of the house. I'll show you the orientation, but this is the northwest side of the house. And you can't see it, but there's a garage here, an external garage, which was originally built into the house, but was then extruded in a fairly late stage of the design, as we will see. And this is the view looking back towards Sidi Bou Said. So this is the reverse angle from the picture that I showed you from Sidi Bou Said looking this way. So it's a beautiful site, and wonderful Tunisian climate, of course, and this is the context for the project. This is the exhibition and conference and events that went with this catalogue. And it's interesting because Roberto Gargiani, who is the commissaire of the exhibition, of the exhibition and the catalogue, though he didn't actually organize it, it was Chacha, what was her name? Chacha? I'm sorry, I can't remember her name. But she was the architect who actually organized physically organized the exhibition. But their slogan for the house is that it's a simple house. So it's, in the Tunisian context now, there's a movement to try to revive interest in the values of modern architecture and to strip it away from the post-colonial, from the colonial aura, if you like. And so there's a big campaign behind all this to try to get the house opened up, to get the Secret Service out, to make it visitable, to make it a tourist attraction and all this. There's a whole politics behind that. And so this presentation of the house as simple architecture, undecorated architecture, is part of the rhetoric of the exhibition. So now I'm going to try and fit the house as it is into a history of Le Corbusier's houses in the 1920s in terms of the development and perfection of his ideas. Le Corbusier liked to say, this is a slogan from the class that you'll know, that nothing is transmissible but thought. And the thought behind this development was incarnated in what's called the 5 points of the new architecture, which I'm not going to talk about in detail, but the key point is the separation of structure from enclosure. So the enclosure, the walls of a house, are no longer its structure. And this house demonstrates it because you can see the pilotti, the thin columns that hold it up, the slabs are completely independent from the walls. So this is an exhibition, in a conference, a lecture in 1929 in Buenos Aires. This is the drawing that he did. He used to do these drawings himself while he was talking. And this explains his principles. There's the parallelized plan of walls made of solid material. Every floor dictates the floor above, and so forth. And this is the revolution of modern architecture, where the little pilotti, the little red points, are completely separate from the organization of the spaces. This is the separation of structure from enclosure. Okay. And this is one of the fundamental ideas of modernism, that is the movement in architecture between 1920 and 1929. Okay. So you find it in the Maison Cook, 1926. There's your pilotti. The pilotti is set back from the wall, so the windows are a curtain wall. The windows are supported from the floor slabs, and the column, you can see, goes all the way up through the building. There's the Villa Stein de Monzy, where it's not so easy to see, but this is also a curtain wall. The pilotti are set back, and the windows are strip windows, which are supported from the slabs. And the end of this sequence, oh, what's that? Water. Oh, thank you. The Villa Savoie in 1929. And in another drawing in his lecture in Buenos Aires in 1929, he shows this development from Auteuil, which is the Maison La Roche, there, to Garches, which is the Villa Stein, to Bezo, Tunis, which is the elevation drawing, to Poissy. So it's part of a sequence of thought. And one of the things with all Le Corbusier's buildings is you have to say that, architects like to say, I had a program from the client, and I carried out the program. Corbusier didn't think like that. He had a client who'd pay him some money, and had to listen a bit to what the clients wanted. But for him, a building was the next stage in the development of his architecture. Okay? So let's not fuss about arguing whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. That's how he worked. Okay. So the origin of the story that I'm going to tell you is in Stuttgart, at the Weissenhof-Siedlung in 1927, where Le Corbusier built two houses. He built a basic little house called the Citroën house type, and he built this, which is basically a slice of an apartment block. Okay, you have to read it as a floor and a half of an apartment block. And it's built on not pilotti, but steel stanchions, which rise up through the building, which create a curtain wall inside the structure of the building. And the interior is completely openable, has a different configuration for day and night, and was an astonishing thing. So the beds slide away at night, slide out at night, and at night, the whole wall there slides across right through to the other side, and there's a door in the sliding panel as well. Okay. So this was a dramatic thing. And Lucien Bezot wrote to the people at Stuttgart, to Werner Graef, who wrote the book, one of the books about the estate, and said he'd like to know more about Le Corbusier's work. And Werner Graef sent him to Le Corbusier's atelier in Paris, and in November of 1927, one of Bezot's associates, somebody called Bourguiard, went to the Rue de Sèvres, the atelier, and met Pierre Jeanneret, Le Corbusier's associate, and they talked. And now I'm going to have to follow a little bit my notes in order not to make a mistake. So what happened was that on the 10th of November 1927, I made a mistake in my own notes, Lucien Bezot, then actually it was him, who visited the atelier. And on the 24th of November, his secretary proposed a new visit by Monsieur Bezot. And he says, this visit will allow us to complete the documentation which you so kindly provided for Mr. Bezot, and he would like to submit to you at the same time a project of a personal villa that he would like to adapt to your ideas. Okay, this is not normally how clients talk to Le Corbusier. Okay. Normally, they said what they wanted, they might have some notes written down, and then Le Corbusier would go off and do a design. This is a client who says he has a project for a villa, and what's more, he sent him 2 plans, measured plans of what he wanted. Okay? And these are actually measured plans, they're to scale. But, I mean, there's nothing about structure, there are no elevations, they're kind of not architectural, they're organizational plans. And they sent him, can I point with this? Does this point? No, it doesn't point. Okay, up there is the site plan. So the sea is down here. Sidi Bou Said is over there. South is down here. So that's southeast, that's northeast, and that's northwest. That's the site. And he sent him a packet of photographs. 12 photographs, I'm just showing you 4, showing the view from the sea here, with this rocky cliff where the house was to go on top, and also showing the house next door. The house next door is important because you'll see that it has a balcony on the north corner of the villa. And this is facing the beautiful view, but protected from the sun and protected from the hot winds, the Scirocco winds, which come from the desert from the south. And this house is mentioned several times. There you can see it again, and there again. And this is where the house was going to be, where the Villa Bezot was built. So there's the site plan. Now, the bottom part of the site was non edificandi. The military owned that whole part, and it couldn't be built on. So it's basically a 10-meter
strip. It's a 12-meter side, 10-meter buildable with 2 meters facing the road on the other side, which couldn't be built on. That's the basic brief. There again, you can see it. And so in Bezo's plan, on the ground floor, the covered garden is also on the north corner, protected from the hot winds and from the sun. Okay. He has a garage. In fact, you can't see it here. Can I go back? No, I can't go back. The garage is on that side, and actually would have meant driving round onto the military land, which is not explainable, really. The entrance was from this northwest corner, and there were basically bedrooms on the ground floor. On the first floor, again, there's a terrace on that corner. Okay, so he's following the genus loci, the general wisdom of the place of how to create a comfortable and well-protected, environmentally protected house. And this is La Tunisoise Industrielle, was his company that he was a director of. And this is the letter. I'm not going to detail the program. He notes that perhaps there would be a space for a second staircase, a service staircase, as well as a main staircase. And he says the client insists that ventilation should be as good as possible in the house. Okay. So Le Corbusier seized on those two sentences, and those became the theme of the first project. So I'm not going to go into detail about all the aspects of the plan. It's going to take too long. And this is what he comes up with. The basic idea is a section where the house is raised off the ground, typical Corbusier idea, and that there is then a flow of air from the bottom all the way up through the house to a roof slab, which is protected by a parasol roof. Okay. Nobody had done anything like that before. This is a complete invention. It came from Le Corbusier reading this thing about ventilation. Okay, so the project is about ventilation. But he also listened to this thing about perhaps you have a service staircase. Well, he just designed the project that nearly won the competition for the Palace of the League of Nations, where you had an incredibly complicated staircase with staircases inside each other, so that different types of people would be delivered to different floors. Actually, this is a kind of classic Beaux-Arts project. If you go to the Bourse in Paris, the Salle des Blés, the Bourse des Blés in Paris, which is done by an academic architect, there's a beautiful staircase there which has a double staircase. If you go up one way, you stop on one floor. If you go up the other way, you stop on the next floor. So this was a kind of classic architectural problem. But you see Pierre Jeanneret, this drawing is by Pierre Jeanneret, sketches this out. It immediately creates all sorts of problems because can you see? Yeah, all this bright light, which is, I suppose is meant to illuminate my face, makes it difficult to read the drawings, but there you are. So it creates problems because on each landing, the domestic people arrive on one side and the noble people arrive on the other side. So it creates all sorts of problems about how, and then on the floor above it changes round. And so it's not a very simple problem that he introduced. The ground floor, he follows Bezo's idea of having the garage on that side. On that, he's following Bezo. So you drive across the military land, and nobody knows how that worked. But the idea was you hollow out the front of the building. So the pilotti are here, and that gives the impression, when you look from the sea, which is the dominant view for him, it's a view that nobody sees, but that's a dominant view for him in the design, the house is lifted on the ground. Actually, although the pilotti are set back from the sides, you don't see it because the walls are solid except for the windows. Okay. And this is the non-edificandi band here. So the idea was the cars would drive around like that. This is the first floor, and you can see the problem with the staircase coming up. So the servants go out that way first, and then the noble people, they come up from the other side and have to go round the staircase to get to the dining room. But look at this. He's put the terrace on the southeast corner, which is where all the hot winds come from. So this is, nobody knows why he did this, but it was not going to be a good idea from the start, and Bezo was going to reject it. And then you can see the effect of this section, that on this floor, all this side are empty spaces. They're the top of double height spaces where the air goes up. And then it's picked up, there's a balcony on this side. So the air from the dining room is here. That's the top of the dining room. It's picked up by the balcony into the salon. And the salon then has a balcony over it, which leads up onto the terrace. Okay. Now, Bezo specifically said he only wanted one living dining room. And Le Corbusier has made three reception areas. Okay. So this is quite typical of how Corbusier worked, in not following what the clients wanted. And then for the bedrooms, it's a similar thing, that each bedroom has a balcony where the bed is, where you go up a staircase and you go out onto the terrace. Okay, and this gives you these elevations. One of the problems which dogged all these first projects is that Bezo told him you can't go out to the edge of the site because the land drops away. But Le Corbusier went out to the edge of the site because he wanted the maximum view from the sea. So he has a gentle slope going down on the side. And the reality was that the slope was much steeper. So there was no question of driving a car around here. Okay. Now, you can say that in one sense he wasn't to blame because the plan that Bezo sent him wasn't very specific on the contours. But if he'd looked carefully at the photographs, he'd have realized that. So this was another thing that from the start wasn't going to work. And in the end, they had to build a whole abutment. This is where the cliff drops away, and there's this huge abutment that they had to build in concrete to support the end of the house. This is at the end of the whole process here. Okay. And so that's what he wanted. That was the view he wanted from the sea, the view that he saw from the photograph. That was the effect that he wanted to make. Sorry? The other house, that's the existing villa which he's kind of sketched in.
This was not published in the compress like this.
No?
Only this, so he rated that.
He erased the house. I'd forgotten that. In fact, you can see that. Yeah. Well, Okay. And these are the interiors which show the effect of the space flowing up through. And they're actually interesting for students of Le Corbusier's furniture, because we were talking about the furniture today. This is a colonial chair. I told you about these wooden chairs with leather straps. That's one there that he's showing here. And those are the leather chairs like he used in all his houses, Maple's leather chairs. And then these are bentwood, the B5 tonne bentwood chairs. So it's already interesting that he's putting furniture into this house. This is before, this is just after Charlotte Perriand joined the atelier. I don't know why I'm showing that Schwab. Okay, right. Yeah, I see. I remember now. This is the Villa Schwab, 1917, which already had a double height space with balconies going around it. So from an early stage, he was interested in double height spaces. And we've been looking at the Maison La Roche, which also has this triple height space in it. So this was a theme of Le Corbusier, to try and break through flaws and get height. You've seen that? Okay. I'm going to go quickly through that. So you can see up there, this is a photograph of this sewer. Up there, you can see the abutment that supports the house now. And I've done a detail of it. There you go. It's not my fault the photograph's like that. This is an old photograph. And this is the model they made for the exhibition. Quite that model where they lift the facade away, and you can see the flow of space in the house. Okay, then, very unusually, Le Corbusier did that first project very quickly. It was already finished by the 25th of January. So it was done in about 3 weeks. For Le Corbusier, that's lightning fast. And clearly, Bezo saw the plans. We don't have a documentation about what he did, but immediately afterwards, Le Corbusier did another project, which is exactly the same as the first project, but just smaller. All Le Corbusier's projects are too big to start with. He never listens to what the clients say about cost or scale or anything. So the client said, oh, that's much too expensive. So his solution was simply to chop off the end. So there's now no garage. The cars just stop underneath the house, and everything is reduced to the point where many of the things that Bezo had specified, like the number of bedrooms, because there were 2 maids' bedrooms, there were 3 children's rooms, there was the master bedroom, and so forth. This project doesn't have them, because it's just made smaller. So you can see he's still got the double staircase, but now he's reversed it. So the noble side of the staircase comes out next to the dining room, but everything else is the same, or nearly the same. I'm not going to go into the differences. Now, one of the interesting things in Le Corbusier's work, and I think in most architects' work, is intertextuality. When an architect is working on different things at the same time, there's a slippage. Ideas move from one project to another. Okay? So this is a charcoal design by Le Corbusier, early design for the second project for the Villa Bezo. And it's very like the Villa Savoie, which was designed 6 months later. And this connection is kind of spooky, because in the elevation plans for this house, the elevation drawings, you have little sketches which are really like the Villa Savoie. You see the one up there? Or this one here? So to the point where you can ask, is this Le Corbusier sketching on this drawing when he was working on the Villa Savoie? Or is this Le Corbusier saying, well, actually, now we've got a nearly square house on an open site, what could we do with it? Why don't we have the pilotis going all around? And, he started thinking in the same way that he thought about for the Villa Savoie. Okay, so the second project didn't correspond in any way to what Bezo wanted. And on the 2nd of May, Bezo wrote a letter formally rejecting the second project, very explicit. And he says, for example, on this terrace, we put the kitchen projecting to protect the open terrace from the sun. Okay? Protection against the scirocco. That's the wind from the southwest, which, without this screen of the kitchen, would make, on certain days, that terrace uninhabitable. So he's quite specifically saying what is obvious if you look at the house next door, what you have to do. And then he says, and this is Bezo being extremely diplomatic, he said, because in the first part of the letter, he repeated almost word for word what he said in the first brief. And he says, it's in consideration of these inspired by these different considerations that we have completely modified the project. So again, he's not going to be browbeaten. Le Corbusier has done this project, he doesn't want it. So he rejects it formally in a typed letter, and he provides 3 floor plans. Okay.
And you provide?
3 floor plans. So here they are. Okay. So what he's doing here is he shows the kitchen protecting the terrace on the first floor. He shows a little terrace for the servants on the ground floor, which is protected by other buildings, by a cupboard and so forth. He moves the garage round to the other side. He has a conventional staircase. You can see up there a conventional staircase which rises up. Actually, he has it going round like that, but that's how he has it. He has a single living room, which is a living dining room, a salle commune, and a kitchen. Okay, and then the rest is all bedrooms. And I think Mrs. Bezos, who actually we know played an important part in these discussions, made sure that each room had lots of cupboards. Okay. So this is really a client's drawing. But the most important aspect of this is that Bezos and his wife clearly thought about the problem of protection from the sun that Le Corbusier was thinking about. And their solution was to have a base larger than the house. They don't show anything about structure in this, but that would be reflected on each floor in terraces that go all the way around. Okay? So there are no pilotti in this, but the implication is that on each floor there would be balconies that would project. Actually, on 2 sides, because on the other side, it's Le Corbusier himself who adds a balcony. So this is protection from the sun by balconies. The balcony provides a kind of brise-soleil. And this plan, provided by Bezos and his engineers, is commented on, and Le Corbusier at the bottom makes some scribbled comments, some scribbled notes, in which he interprets Bezos' plan in his architectural way. Okay. And this is almost exactly what he then draws in his lecture in Buenos Aires, the free plan inside a structure. He still isn't showing the pilotti, but for him it's obvious that the slabs would be supported by pilotti and that these would be separate from the enclosures of the rooms. So then they've had this absolutely stern reprimand, your project has been rejected, and they do a 3rd project. And that 3rd project doesn't follow Bezos' plan or follow the little sketch that Le Corbusier did. So it's even a question of when that little sketch was done. Was it done afterwards or before? So what they do, basically, in order to get the protection of the terrace on the first floor by in fact, they have a bedroom there, is to chop off 1 floor. They just chop off 1 floor. So now the salon is on the ground floor. There's a concrete screen, which in some versions has a glass screen protecting the terrace, but it's still the ventilation section. He just could not give up this idea, this beautiful idea of the ventilation that goes right through with the parasol roof on top. It then becomes long again, because Bezos, in that letter, I didn't read all of it to you, but he says, he insists on the number of rooms he needs for the maid servants and for the children and all the rest of it, and so Corbusier has to put them back in again, so the house gets longer again. And so this is the section. You can see the section still has this profile, and he's added a cellar to house some extra things, because Bezos again says he needs a cellar and so forth. And so then, in July, finally this project was sent off, and Bezos writes, and he says, "I've just received your plans. I'm very sad to see that you've taken no change to very little account of the very precise indications that I gave you in the month of May. I must ask you now to study these carefully, immediately, and to conform as exactly as you can to what is required." These conditions correspond strictly to my needs, and I hold absolutely that they should be respected. And then he says, I'm going to come to Paris soon, and he hopes to have an immediate response. Well, July 1928 was a very busy time for Le Corbusier. He was designing the Centre Soyuz headquarters in Russia. He was designing the Villa Savoie. He had a number of other projects, including the Maison Lucha. He was doing the finishing touches to the Villa Stein, and it wasn't a very good time to do a complete redesign. But Pierre Jeanneret did a version in which he goes back almost, this ground plan is almost copied directly from Bezo. There's, except that he's got the bedroom and the shelter on the wrong side, but other than that, he's got the staircase, the garage, the bedrooms, and the key thing is on the first floor, the terrace is protected by the kitchen, and there's this combined living room. And here, they've put in the Corbusian structure. So there are the pilotis that support the terraces, and they're cantilevered on the front. So again, the privileged view, the view that nobody has, the view from the sea, has this beautiful projection of the terraces supported by the columns inside. And on the top floor, although the separate parasol roof, the parasol roof that has nothing except air underneath it, has gone, he keeps part of it by having most of it just a terrace looking out over the sea. So he's kept a little bit of that. And in this project, he has plans. Now, I say Le Corbusier, but this is entirely Pierre Jeanneret who's done this. Le Corbusier was too busy to look at it at this point. So you can see the comparison between Bezo's plan and Pierre Jeanneret's fourth project. And, yep.
There's one thing that's amazing because of the weight that the columns on the sides
Yeah.
are just in a water distance than to sit in the center.
Yeah.
So this whole idea of a neutral grid also.
There's 6 meters in that way and 5 meters in that way. Yeah. Yes, it's very interesting. It's because it's 12 meters long.
But
Oh, no, it's
the load in
longer
the
than that.
middle
Yeah.
is
Sorry?
heavier than on the side. So
Yeah.
you can use less columns.
Right.
I think this is the influence of Bezo, okay.
Yeah. That's interesting. Of course, you're pointing something out I hadn't realized, but yes. And this is what it looks like. This is the perspective they did. When they do a project and they're presenting it to the client, Pierre Jeanneret always does perspectives like this with color, chalk, and so forth to make it look nice, and little people and everything. And so here we have the beginning of this idea of the domino house, the separation of structure from enclosure in which the inside is a free plan. Then they do a revision of that, which is basically kind of tidying it up. It's not hugely different, but it has the interesting feature of a round bedroom on the top floor facing the beautiful view.
But here the columns are all the same. I don't understand it.
Sorry?
The column distances are the same.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's... dimensions are very interesting for Corbusier because in all his projects, where he could, he used 5 meters. Always started off with 5 meters. And then he has to adapt, according to different things. And I don't know why in the other project they were different. I'm not sure. And then this project gets worked up. And this is an interesting one because, as you saw here, the pilotis are in line with the edge, and therefore they're square because they're like parts of a wall. But here he has a wall because he's realized that there's actually protection there. This corner here is 2.5 meters above the ground. So this is already here, the edge of the slab is already a terrace, a balcony. And he's beginning to realize that. So in this design, in order to make the pilotis visible, he sets back the walls to make the elevation change. And again, always with Le Corbusier, he tries to introduce curves. Yeah. This is, you can say this is because of his paintings. You can say this is a kind of anthropomorphic thing, trying to introduce bodies into his buildings. But also it's to show the freedom of the plan. How can a plan be free if it's always straight lines? Okay. So the basic thing is here you have the entrance. You go into a hallway, and there's the staircase. The garage is at the side still. That garage is then going to be extruded. And this is the effect that you get. So the domino effect of pilotis separate from the structure is made visible because the wall is bent back to expose them. So this is Sommer, his favorite mason, Georges Sommer, who did a complete set of structural drawings, which were rejected. Rejected by Lucien Beissot because he had his own construction company. Why should he pay this French builder to build his house when he could build them himself? And the reason he gave was that Sommer had a patented floor system, which he called the PIMA. Never understood what it stands for. But anyway, PIMA floor system, which is basically a grid of piers, of beams with pot, ceramic tiles inside, and reinforced with iron rods. And Sommer was saying, no, this is a patented system, you have to pay for it. So Beissot wouldn't do that, so the house was built in Tunis by a Tunisian company, and for that reason we have no building records. There's no information about how much it cost, or any problems they had, leakages, all the usual things that you have information about Le Corbusier buildings. There was a final set of changes. I'm sorry, this is reoriented. It should be kind of down like this. The garage becomes a bedroom. Okay, and the garage just becomes a little breeze block garage outside. So this is, these two plans are plans by the Tunisoise Industrielle, by Beissot's company, preparing to build the thing. So it's all carefully dimensioned, and there are sets of these drawings that have the central heating and glazing and all the details of construction on them. And they had this idea of stripping out everything on the top floor except for what they call a mirador. So keeping Le Corbusier's beautiful curved room, which he thought would be a bedroom, but simplifying it rather to make it easier to build, he finished it up like that. But in the end, they add 2 bedrooms at the side. So there are the 2 bedrooms added. There's the mirador. And this again is a Tunisien Industriel design with Pierre Jeanneret's annotations on it. And so this is what it looked like when it was completed. As I say, you can't see this now because there's the beginning of the presidential palace here. This is the back, with the, as I said already, with the garage on that side. These are the photographs taken by this photographer Thomas Billange in 2015. No, it was taken before that because when Thomas Billange took the photographs, there was already the aerials for the Secret Service communication on the roof. So this was taken sometime before that, I'm not quite sure when. This was from the 30s probably. This is Thomas Billange, and you can see the aerial on the roof there. And notice there's no color in the house, and there's no evidence that the outside of the house was ever colored. The inside was, though. This is the staircase leading up to the 2nd floor with the little ladder which goes up to the roof terrace. Okay. So Le Corbusier never visited the site, nor Pierre Jeanneret, and just as he never visited the site at Stuttgart for the Weissenhof Siedlung building. And the great advantage of that is that Corbusier insisted on controlling the colors, the polychromy in the house. And when he didn't visit the site and didn't talk to the painter directly, he sent samples and he sent instructions. And so this is a piece of paper with actual color samples, commercial color samples put on them and numbered from blue to light gray to burnt umber to pink to green and to dark gray. And these are the colors that he'd used since 1918 in his painting, where he insisted on what he called the grande gamme of colors, which are the earth colors, which all go together naturally, and which are stable, architecturally stable, he says.
You also told them where they should be. Is there information where they should be?
Yes, we're coming to that. Yeah. So there are internal sketches of every room with indications of color. And what's interesting is that Corbusier had a theory in various texts, some of which you've looked at. He talks about a theory of color. The colors should be used in certain ways. That, for example, red or dark red should never be used in the shade because it becomes invisible. You should only use blue in the shade. Red should be used in illuminated places. You should use browns and earth colors to fix a wall, but you can use light blue, which is a dynamic color, to make a wall look further away or to move or whatever. Actually, he doesn't seem to do this in his actual designs. So this is the main salle commune with the freestanding pilotis in it. And he's got this, I can't remember what 3 is. 3 is burnt umber. So underneath the window is burnt umber underneath and white above. I don't think there's anything in his theory that supports that. I think he's just making the part of the window underneath the window kind of disappear a bit to enhance the view. But why the bit above it is white, I cannot say. The rest is all green. In the petit salon, oh yes, the thing that happened was that the kitchen, which is in Corbusier's plan had a very privileged view because it was right facing the view, becomes a petit salon. And the poor cook had to work in what was originally the office, the pantry, which is a very small space. So this room, the petit salon, in his design was all green. But Sabine Massenet, the great niece of Lucien Bezot, she says that she remembers it as being a brilliant blue. Now, those of you who know Tunis, or actually any of the North African countries, or Greece for that matter, there is a kind of Mediterranean blue. There's a blue which is a common color that is everywhere, that you see everywhere. And this is a kind of Tunisian blue that they had in this thing. And it's very beautiful, and they loved it, and so forth. So they changed, if this color scheme was adopted, they changed it to blue at some point. Then there's an interesting thing. This is one of the daughters' rooms, which is pink. Pink with, this time, white above and below the window. Again, I can't explain why the treatments of the windows change from one room to the next. But there is a kind of association of pink with girls, right? Okay. And I think that's one thing that he's doing. The Mirador is all white with a burnt umber back wall. This is the back wall. This is another bedroom, I'm not sure for whom it is, in which the walls are all white and the back is dark gray. Here you have again contrasts of dark gray and white. I mean, I think in some ways he's experimenting with these colors. He's trying to say, how can you make rooms different? And that is one role for color, which became very important with the mass housing project. Oh, thank you, yes. Great, thank you. In the Unité d'Habitation, for example, he uses color in the balconies that run right along the building to give a sense of identity. You know, I'm the green one, you know, fifth along kind of thing. You know, I'm the red one there. So this idea of trying to counteract standardization with color is a theme. And I think there might be something in that as well, that each room has a character which is slightly different. Whether it's typed to gender or typed in some other way, I can't say. This is the entrance hall when you come in, which is again pink all round. Sabine Massenet says that she was 5 when they moved to the house. And it was a very unpleasant time. Her father had just died in Algiers, and they moved and they arrived in the middle of the night, and she woke up in a beautiful pink room. That's what she says. Anyway, this pink is this is a windowless area which you come in from the entrance, and the pink is a welcoming color that welcomes you in. But I mean, I just don't think that there's a theory of polychromy behind any of this. This is much simpler and more human, I think, way of using color. And then the exteriors, too, according to Le Corbusier, were meant to be colored. In fact, there are 2 different versions of this. There's one in which you can see on the top left that this little bull-nosed shape, which is actually a storage shape, was going to be light blue, was going to be blue. And next to it, it was to be pink. And then the rest of it was blue on the first floor and pink for the Mirador. So there's a kind of separation of the different floors. On this version, which is just handwritten, it's blue all the way through. And you can say that's blue like the sea, you know. And then there are different colors. So if you look at this in the exhibition, they've done that first version. They've made a model with these colors based on the first version. And you can see the effect it might have had. I'm sorry about the reflection on the perspex. Okay, so that's why I think the Villa Bezo is worth studying. And you might not agree with me, but I'm very fond of this house. I think it's full of interest, and it raises a lot of questions about how Le Corbusier worked, but also about relationship with clients, but also about climate and so forth. And this thing about the parasol roof and using natural ventilation was a theme that would come back in his work. First of all, in the steel project he did in, I think it was 1945, for an exhibition space in Paris, which was a steel roof, 2 welded steel roofs on supports with a kind of boxy interior. That became the Zurich Pavilion that was actually built after his death, that project. And then, of course, there are the Indian buildings in Ahmedabad, the Shoda House, the Shodan House, which was the end product of another house for another person, and then the Mill Owners Association building. And each of these, there's a lot of flow of air through the building. And the Curicid House that Alejandro Lapunzina will talk to us about next Thursday. So, questions? Okay. Anyone got any questions?
Not yet. I need some time. This timer was not about vernacular.
My question would be about this kind of relationship, not even a relationship, but the idea of designing without visiting the house. I was curious, I think, when did this change, when did this come to be? And also, I mean, was this something that, as you said, that Le Corbusier didn't visit some of the other houses before they were finished, or or never did. But
Yeah.
I'm curious if this was, because this seems to me that it's quite a different way of designing at the time. Yes, and also receiving a certain set of documentation and then having the correspondence through the written word and having the iterations. And it's very similar to how we do things now, and even participating in competitions without ever visiting and having a restricted...
Yeah. I mean, on the one hand, you know, in the class we've been talking about Adolf Loos, you know, and so forth. And what Adolf Loos says is the problem is architects are separated from the building site. So they draw things with their pencils that workers have to hack out in stone. You know. And this separation of architects from the building site is one of the big problems for architecture altogether. You know, it's not understanding the practice of building and not understanding the site, not being there on the site at every hour of the day or night to see the effects of light, the wind, you know, acoustics and all the rest of it. Corbusier was pretty good at visiting sites when they were close, you know, in Paris and other places. But the two examples I cited, the Weissenhof Siedlung in Stuttgart, he was too busy to go and he didn't send anybody. So he sent an assistant to build the house out of Roth. And, you know, Tunis, it cost a fortune to go to Tunis, and Bezer wasn't going to pay him to go, you know. And I think Bezer wanted to control the project himself. So I think, you know, you say this is current practice and everything. I think Le Corbusier was very much trained in a way of thinking which would say this is not a good thing. You know, the first houses that he designed in La Chaux-de-Fonds, he was on the site all the time. He was actually doing the craftsmanship. He was making the sgraffito himself with his friends. There's a photograph of him doing it. You know, he was present when the masons were carving the stone and so forth. So I think in his gut, in his fiber, he would say it's not a good thing not to be present. But it's certainly true that because of events more and more, he was designing at a distance. It's interesting in India. I mean, he went, was it 18 times? 23 times he went to India during the construction of Chandigarh and the Ahmedabad buildings, which is enormous, you know, in terms of time for a man in his 60s and 70s. And he was very concerned to try to understand the environment and the climate and the building materials.
Building methods with the boom and with all the concrete.
Yes, he was fascinated by this, with the female labor and you know,
By the building process.
by the building process. Absolutely, yes. But I mean, I think it still remains a big problem for architects, designing at a distance. I don't know what you think.
To think about it.
Okay.
But I think the Bezoar house was, I think, the only house in which he had a really, let's say, a client who really know what he wanted.
Yeah.
Because the other houses were more for, let's say, for rich people who thought, oh, we should have another type of house
Yeah.
to be done. And so that's, I think, the difference.
Yes. Another client who had ideas was Planeix. Planeix, yeah. But it's a much more modest house. But Planeix was a sculptor. Basically, he made funerary monuments. You know, that kind of sculptor.
Because the artists, I mean, the artists knew exactly what they wanted.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
The atelier buildings he did.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, that's a whole chapter, the relationship with Ozenfant in the design of the Ozenfant studio, which we'll probably never know because it was all done in conversation. There's no documentation about it. And it's quite certain that Ozenfant had a role in the design of the atelier, but we don't know anything about it really. Okay, yes?
I don't know, a dumb question. Was he ever rejected by clients, and how many times it was?
All the time. All the time. I mean, almost all his competition designs were rejected, and some of them extremely painful for him. So that the League of Nations project in 1927, he was one of 6 equal winners. All the other architects were basically employed. There was one architect chosen, but all the others were employed as consultants, except Le Corbusier. And Le Corbusier said, you know, I should have won it, and it was only because they said that the drawings were printed and not done in ink that I didn't get it, and he blamed Le Maresquier, and he had a whole campaign in the whole of Europe with lectures and exhibitions and pamphlets, and he sued the League of Nations, and, you know, it was very painful, and it went on for years. And then he had another big saga with the United Nations building in New York, which he also failed. He was one of a number of architects who worked together on the project, and he did a design which Niemeyer adapted. You know, Niemeyer was a close follower of Le Corbusier, admired him enormously, but Niemeyer was kind of clever, and he adapted Le Corbusier's idea to make it better, you know. But Le Corbusier said, it's my idea, you know, stolen it. And some of this took a very bad form. 1936, when he went to Brazil, he worked with a group of architects who was designing the Ministry of Health building. And Le Corbusier worked with them on a project, completely different project, a long building facing the sea on a different site. And just before he left, the ministry said, no, it's got to be a central city site, completely different site, with buildings all around. And they just started working on that when he left. And he did nothing really about that site. But later, I think it was in the Œuvre Complète or in one of his publications, he actually put a sketch drawing as if he'd done a sketch of the building on the site. And Lucio Costa actually wrote to him and said, we weren't impressed by the fact that you had traced over a photograph of the building, constructed building, as if it was your sketch.
So,
yeah. So,
because he did it because he wanted to have it as afterwards in the Œuvre Complète.
yes.
He wanted to explain that in a way it belongs to the development of his work, in fact.
Absolutely, he wanted to appropriate it. And of course, it was an important step in his development, because with the Brise Soleil, which he later developed his own Brise Soleil, but that's one of the first buildings that had Brise Soleil all the way up. Yeah. Good. You're not going to challenge me on the colonial aspect of the house?
This time it's like the question about like how did he get away with...
Sorry?
How did he get away with clients complaining about the unlivable conditions in the house? Like how did the clients also reacted about...
Okay, now hang on. This is different to the other houses. Bezo never complained about the house as built.
No, but like in general, like how was the relationship of him with the clients from the
Right,
houses?
okay. Yeah, okay. So he had conflicts with all his clients because all the houses leaked for different reasons, mostly the flat roofs, because for some reason German concrete roofs don't leak, but French ones do. And I think it's because of the expansion, so that the concrete slab, when it reaches the upstand, however much you put on top of it, Le Corbusier thought you could just put earth and grass and then slabs and so forth, but it's never enough, and it creates leaks. Okay. So with Madame Savoie, for example, you know, she wrote saying it's leaking in the cellar, it's leaking in this and that. And all of these clients, they all complained before the 10-year, there's a 10-year rule where architects are responsible. And after that, it's the owners who have to pay for things. And, you know, they did repair some of the things, but basically Le Corbusier would simply say, you know, we can't do anything about it. You know, it wasn't, I mean, he would typically, he would reply to this long list of complaints, and he would say, we have always been the friend of our clients. You know, as if the client was being unfriendly. You know. So it's not a particularly good, you know, chapter in his story. But it's similar to many other modern architects, and indeed, actually, classical architects, you know, eclectic architects. I have a friend who wrote a thesis on an English architect, I've forgotten his name now, I've forgotten their name, doesn't matter. An architect of country houses, huge country houses. And there's a correspondence with the client, which is exactly the same as the correspondence with Le Corbusier. You know, it's saying this doesn't work, that doesn't work, this room's too cold, you know, whatever. And the architect writing back and saying, well, you know, live with it, basically, you know. And it's one of the problems is that concrete architecture does need maintenance from the start. You know, if you have a flat roof, you have to unblock the downpipe. Otherwise, it will flood. And people didn't do it. That's one of the kinds of problems. Windows have to be kept repainted if they're wooden, or with big, heavy glass, you know, plate glass in a thin wooden frame. It will go wrong, you know, quite quickly if you don't repaint it all the time. You know, things like that. So there is another side to it, but basically, Le Corbusier, like most architects, just resisted having to pay for repairs to buildings they designed. And there's no particular way to excuse that. Any other? Yes? Yes, no, use the microphone because then they can hear you in the world.
So within the same context, in regards to the relationship with the clients, you mentioned that Le Corbusier was considering every project as a step to develop his own architecture. And I was wondering, was he also perhaps selective in terms of, if he had the luxury to be selective with the projects in terms of the sites? Because I am wondering, seeing these plans and also some other houses that we looked at, the geometry of the plan kind of helped him to develop his own ideas in terms of, like, it seems like it's prescribed always within this rectangular or like kind of orthogonal sites, so that he can then work within it.
Yes, I mean, most sites were given to him orthogonally. You know, I mean, most sites had boundaries, and he would build up to the edge of the boundary without the either 1.5 meter or 5 meter non-edificandi strip where you couldn't build and so forth. The open sites, like the Villa Savoie, where there was this whole field, you could build anywhere on the field, what he did there was he reverted to the square, or near square. It's not quite a square, but it's nearly a square. And that goes back to basic theories of his ideas, that goes back to the purism and so forth, which is that the circle and the square are the perfect forms. You know, you should only do rectangles if you have to, basically. So a lot of his projects, his urban projects especially, or suburban projects, is a struggle with the site, as we saw for the Maison La Roche. You know, it's a very difficult site, neighbors all round, very difficult access, the sun on the wrong side, you know, all this sort of stuff. And it's a struggle with this to get something done. I think your question would be even more interesting if it was applied to some of the post-war architecture, where in some of the projects he does, you have a kind of invention and of abstraction, if you like the French embassy project he did for Brazil is a very abstract sort of design with circles and, you know, things like that. Or the governor's palace in Ahmedabad, in Chandigarh, or I don't know, various other projects that I could think about if I cleared my head and thought about it. There he really is kind of using the project, and these weren't going to be built, you know, this was just a project, to explore geometric ideas and spatial ideas as well. But there is constantly in his mind the idea that he was developing an architecture, developing a manner, what the French call an écriture, a writing. Yeah.
But sorry, one more thing that what I also wanted to specify is that was he ever paying attention, or like was it a criteria to him if he wanted to take a project, like the site itself?
Oh yes. Yeah, I mean, one of the cases that we look at later is the Villa Stein And there are two completely different projects for that run more or less in parallel. And one of them, on June 20th, I think it was, I won't remember the date, but in June 1926, he'd just come back from Pessac, from the opening of Pessac, and he went where he'd met Anatole de Monzy, the Minister of the Interior at that time, and he was designing this house for Gabrielle de Monzy, the wife of Anatole de Monzy, and he went right round to the site, the Vaucresson site, and he made a number of sketches and worked up a design which really was based on the genus loci, you know. So he did sketches all around, and one of the things is that there are two little pine trees which became a theme in the building, that he lined up the building with these two pine trees. And then there was a little copse of, I don't know, aspen trees or something like that. He draws them as little flimsy trees. And the design is to produce bedrooms on the first floor among these trees. And so he designs a long building like this on pilotis, all leading to this thing. And he has this amazing promenade where from the terrace, you go out through a window, along an external ledge, like a staircase but horizontal, then up another staircase and out onto another level. So that was a landscaped project. It was all about profiting from the trees and so forth. Then he drops that and does a completely different project, which is the one we know, which is rectangular with everything inside it, and and so forth. Very disciplined, and is completely.
Trees disappear.
Sorry?
The trees disappear.
Disappear. He cuts them down. Yeah, and it's an unusual thing. He normally did everything to protect trees, but that's occasion where he cut the trees down completely. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I am not the best speaking in English, but I will try to do my best. I am really interested in the moment they are talking about, like the 27 specifically.
28, yeah.
Yeah, 28, 27.
Yeah.
So at that moment, if I am correct, also is the master plan of Stuttgart, where Le Corbusier also is making another project by his own, but also Mies van der Rohe and also...
Yeah, the Weissenhof-Siedlung, yeah.
But specifically I'm interested in, is the work of Bruno Taut and Mies, it can be an interpretation of his house, like he's trying to prove something in Stuttgart.
Sorry, he's trying to what?
He's trying to prove something, or in a way using the color or using the technology.
Right, yeah.
Specifically because of the facade, that is the first time, if I am correct, I don't know, that used the metallic structure in the facade.
Yeah.
And if you find also these comments in the other villa in Tunis, like if you really can find a relation between Le Corbusier two projects, but also an influence on the master plan and the people he is working with.
I'm not sure what you mean by the master plan, because at Stuttgart there was a master plan by Mies van der Rohe for all these different houses, and Le Corbusier just built two of them. As you say, this is the first steel building that he built in 1927, and it was linked to Edmond Vanner, who was, that's right, and he did a whole range of designs of apartment blocks for Edmond Vanner. Edmond Vanner was an engineer, constructor in Geneva. All of these designs are with steel structure. And so this is why I say that the double house, the house I showed you of Le Corbusier, are floors of an apartment block. Yeah, they're repeatable floors. And it's another lecture to explain this, but if you look at the plans, there are connections with these plans. He does day-night plans for Vanner as well. And eventually, that turns into the Clarté apartment building in Geneva, which is a steel building as well. And all the way through his life, he wanted to build in steel. And for one reason or another, it didn't work out. But his housing project for the 30s, which began in 1928, that replaced Citrahan and Domino and the Esprit Nouveau Pavilion, concrete structures, as his go-to design for reproducible housing was the Maison Loucheur. And that was a project which had a 45 centimeter stone wall built locally by local masons out of local materials. This was to satisfy the unions. And then a prefabricated building of steel which are clipped on either side. These are semi-detached houses. And there are hundreds of designs for Maison Loucheur, and the first project for the Villa de Mondreau, which is where he completely threw out the 5 points of the new architecture, because it's stone walls, it doesn't have a roof garden, there's only one pilotis, and so forth. The first project for de Mondreau was a Maison Loucheur. Okay. So the Maison Loucheur, and that crops up again and again all the way through the 1930s, right through to 1939, just before the war. It's one of the things that I think that I'd most like to reconstruct is the Maison Loucheur, because it really is a very interesting project. And
I think it's also related to the fact that this apartment was an apartment which was all things, there's movable things and things.
yes.
And so the steel structure made it really, because the sliding door, which we didn't see, which come from behind the cupboard,
Yeah.
goes in, so that
Between the two,
column was deconstructed.
yeah,
It's because it goes through the column
yeah.
to reach the window.
Because the structure all the way through with these twin stanchions with a gap, and you could slide the wall through. Yeah.
But that's in a way it's a Mies detail also.
Sorry,
In a way, it's a Mies detail also. That's what it. Yeah, that I am trying to find a connection with it, not only because of talking about Le Corbusier,
Yeah.
not also talking about the context.
Yeah.
When he talked about this column and how this sliding door is
Yeah.
something that is, in a way, it's not language. I think it's not language until that moment of Le Corbusier. It's more language that is more perhaps from Mies, and he used the technology in a way that
okay.
he
In
can
some
improve the
ways,
system.
the double house by Corbusier is way in advance of Mies in certain aspects. Mies designed this building with steel structure, with regularly spaced steel columns, so that every apartment could be different. But in all the apartments on the 4 floors, I can't remember, of the Mies apartment, there's only one where there's a freestanding column. In every other case, the walls hide the columns. Okay. This is one of the problems that goes right back to the Domino project. With my class, we'll talk about in structural rationalism. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about structural rationalism. He designed this Domino project in 1915, which is this diagram, you know the diagram, where you have complete separation of structure from enclosure, okay? And you'd think this is the revolution of modern architecture, already done then, okay? But actually, he used this system in actual designs. And what he did was, every one of these columns is hidden by walls. And he realized that it creates a problem, because far from freeing up the plan, it means that all the rooms have to be the same size. Yes. So he goes out of his way. For example, in one of the Domino houses, he wants to make the salon bigger than the room next to it. So he has to create cupboards which disguise the thing and allow him to make the bigger space. So, and that was Mies's problem as well. You know, a whole range of different architects, Swiss architects, German architects, Dutch architects, designed different apartments in the Mies block. But they all work as if the columns are fixed. Now, Mies had this idea that you could have flexible partition walls that had a system that you could, wedge them in at the bottom and you could move them and all the rest of it, and they would hold themselves up because they're being a right angle. Didn't happen. But it's only in one apartment that you actually have a freestanding pilotis in the Mies block. Of course, Mies completely radicalized modern architecture in the Barcelona Pavilion. That's the next story. But in that sense, he hadn't understood the advantage of his own scheme yet. And even Gropius, with his little prefabricated house, all of steel construction, there are no freestanding pilotti. There's no freestanding steel stanchions. Everything's enclosed.
But there is a freestanding column in the
Martstam.
Markstam.
Yes, yes, there is.
That's the interesting thing.
Yep.
So it is a stone outside,
Yeah.
and to make a complete free space, there
Yep.
is this column. I don't. Yeah. I
Yeah,
think-
Martstam is a good case. And that was another steel house.
Yeah. Oh, it was a steel house.
A steel house. It was steel, absolutely, yeah. And the column is a thin steel
Yeah.
stanchion. Yeah. Mm. I mean, you can see that inside. You can still see it. If you go up the staircase in the Stam house, you can still see the steel. And actually, the same with the Sharoon house. Sharoon house. There's a freestanding column in the Sharoon house as well. And
That's a concrete column.
it's mixed because
No, I mean, yes, stone or masonry.
I think it's masonry of the column, but the staircase, for example, again, is in steel of the Sharoon house. Yeah. Yes.
So I was just curious, why was the only sort of property or design that project that he did in Tunisia? I mean, considering the French colonial history in Tunisia, and then also his status amongst the upper class at the time. I mean, why is this his only design project in Tunisia?
Well, he had this whole adventure in Algiers, in Algiers and Algeria. So he made a sequence of urban plans for Algiers, which he, again, was another of his great defeats, which he celebrates again and again. And I mean, that's a whole other story. That's another lecture. I'm sorry, it's very complicated. But I mean, he did some very interesting projects for Algerian clients, who were mostly French, what they called Pieds Noirs, French colonizers, like the Dunant housing scheme, which again is a climate control project because it's slanted up. Yeah. Yeah, there's terraces, yeah. And that's partly for climate control as well. And he did a beautiful villa. What was the name of the project? Cherchel. Thank you. It's good to have a prompt. Which is a wonderful project because it's thinking about Arab architecture. So it's a series of little cells with domes and little arches. And instead of being a single house, it's like a kind of, how can you describe it? It's a kind of cluster, of projects. It's a very beautiful project. 1942, thank you. Yes. Yeah, that's right, yeah. That's right. Caroline Molchet, when she talks about the Maison Jaoul. Yeah. Yeah.
I was thinking, what would you say for you is the relevance today of studying autonomous objects of modernism, such as, for example, the house?
Transmissible thought. It's what you can get out of them. It's a little bit like this thing about icons. We shouldn't worship icons. The Protestant Revolution, Puritan Revolution, was basically saying that the Catholics had passed to a point where they were worshipping the icon and not the thing. Like Moses had challenged the worship of the golden calf. Okay, so you should go for the essence and not the thing. Okay, so, and obviously you shouldn't copy Corbusier buildings. That's a starting point. But if there are ideas which are interesting, you should extract them. And if there are sequences of ideas that run across buildings, you should look at those as well. You shouldn't fetishize the object. Okay. Though, you'll never understand the ideas unless you study the object. And that means not just studying the design process, but studying the buildings when they exist, and really visiting them and feeling them and understanding them as they are. You're not that doesn't satisfy you.
No, yeah. I understand this. I just think, yeah.
Sorry, get the mic, because I'm sorry, I always have trouble with your voice. I don't know why. It's very clear, it's very beautiful, but I can't understand it often.
Then what would these ideas be for you specifically that you would like to keep for today's situation, and what would be relevant for you specifically in this complex
For me,
works?
out of this building or in general from Le Corbusier?
Yeah, from this...
No, which? From this building or from...
The values of this building in today's situation. Yeah.
Oh, in today's session?
Situation?
Yeah, I mean, I think what Le Corbusier shows in many of his projects is the layering of ideas. You know, that you should understand how projects emerge from a layering of ideas, different ideas, which are sometimes in conflict with each other and in conflict with circumstances which produces a result. What I think Corbusier is a warning against is the idea of the immediate on-paper design. You know, that designs always have to go through, with Corbusier, they always have to go through a process. Yeah. Do you agree with that?
Yes, of course.
Yes. Yeah. So, and this process is very important.
So no conceptual architecture.
Yeah, that's right. And I think the other thing, you know, I've talked to you about contradiction, you know, that most people are afraid to talk about contradictory ideas, because it seems irrational. Corbusier worked a lot with contradiction. And I think it's a fertile source of inspiration, contradiction, because it's a challenge. You know, it's very difficult to hold two opposing ideas at the same time, but it can produce a very interesting creative result. And I think Corbusier is an example of that. Again and again in his projects, you find oppositions of ideas. And sometimes I think he kind of almost creates them. You know, he makes this happen. It's not just his idea running up against the client or against the site or against cost or these factors. It's often that he builds into the thing. I mean, like with Bezo, the fact that he wants to design the thing for the beautiful view, but he also wants to have a double staircase, which creates planning problems about how you organize each plan. And he also wants to have it in such a way that there's this ventilation all the way going through. And he also wants the view from the sea. Okay? These are pretty much incompatible elements if you put them all together. And in the end, he has to favor some over the others. Is that clear? I don't know.
And I think it's really like that, because also this is the project where he at last managed to very relaxed to break through the floor.
Yeah, yes.
Because this was the big problem in the early projects, you know, how do you bring the vertical dimension?
The vertical dimension, yes. Which he admires, which he admires very much. And this house by Jean Badavisi that I showed you some pictures of, it's a little stone house that Badavisi adapted. What Badavisi did was break through the floor, to make a hole in the floor, and to climb up. And Le Corbusier admired that hugely. And
it was already because he found about this vertical dimension in the ateliers and in the Citroën. So in a way, the Citroën concept is a very early one.
Yeah.
Was brought in suddenly in the, let's say, the domino world. I think this as a contact unit, very contradiction things brought together. That I think this is of the first project.
Yes, there's an evolution. I mean, the Citroën is a double height space with the mezzanine and so forth.
I think there is also the time, the necessity of the time to conceive, and it's probably something that we have to think about now with EI or some quick way to think. But on all this project, it's 6 months or even time it's 8 months or 9 months. It's a long time to find a solution.
Yes.
It's not an easy and quick process, immediate process. It's a long process.
And this project is very unusual in the speed of the first project emerged. Le Corbusier explains the design process. Okay, because he was often very late in producing a first project, and he says the mind is a little bit like a box. You throw all the elements into the mind, and then you let them be. And then a process, which he always describes in organic terms, he says simmering, like cooking, simmering, or brewing, like making beer, or giving birth. The natural processes that happen with these raw materials in the mind. And then suddenly, inspiration comes. That's how he describes how he works. And for him, creation, I think he was particularly thinking of paintings, but also of buildings, is a kind of miracle. It's something that you can never understand completely. And later on, we'll talk about this later, a little bit later, he develops kind of quite mystical ideas about this, about the other side, about a barrier that divides the physical world with the world of the imagination. And that the world of the imagination, he talks about God. He doesn't believe in God, but he means it's the world of the gods, the world of the spirits, if you like. And that you pass over, in some sense, into this thing. And he had this phrase after the war, ineffable space, which is l'espace indicible, which is very difficult to understand, and I've never read a good description about it. And it's actually, people write about it as if it's about space. It's not about space. It's about this thing up there, which you enter into in the work of art. Sorry? Yeah.
It's the higher concept.
Yes, it's the higher, yeah, exactly. Le Corbusier was a dualist. He believed that there was a fundamental gap between the physical world and the spiritual world.